She always believed their love was strong and their marriage honest. But after Gerald Carter's death, Linda discovered a truth he never spoke of. A Cold War past buried in secrecy, a file that changed everything, and a search for answers that could rewrite the story they thought they knew. Before we dive into this journey of revelations and devotion, let me know where you're tuning in from today. Linda stood in her dim living room, the thin curtains closed against the midday sun. Her husband, Gerald, had died just 2 weeks earlier, and the house felt as though it were in mourning along with her. Dust motes drifted in the faint beams of light, settling on the hutch where Gerald's modest radio equipment once rested. He had always been fascinated by signals and static, by the faint whine of broadcasts from distant lands, a passion that led to his career as a radio technician during the Cold War, stationed in Turkey. At least that was the story Linda had known. Now, however, she wasn't so sure about anything. She pressed a tissue against her eyes, feeling the onset of fresh tears. Her grief was a raw ache, made worse by the disturbing puzzle that had landed in her lap at the funeral. She remembered the funeral vividly. The small church in their suburban town had been filled with solemn faces, neighbors, acquaintances, a handful of Gerald's old colleagues from his days in communications. The eulogies painted Gerald as an ordinary man with an extraordinary heart, someone who never sought glory but found contentment in quiet living. Linda, numb with sorrow, could scarcely manage to greet people through her tears. She had just placed a hand on his casket, bidding him a final farewell, when the stranger stepped forward. He was a slim man with a deep-set gaze, wearing a black coat in the summer heat. He offered no condolences, no introduction. He simply pressed a small wrapped parcel into her hand, murmured, "He was a good man, remember that," and vanished among the black-clad mourners. Linda's confusion only sharpened her grief. She'd stood motionless in the aisle for a long moment, the parcel clutched to her chest. Then she tucked it into her handbag. For the next several days, her sorrow overshadowed her curiosity about the package. It was only when she found herself alone, the funeral flowers wilting in vases, that she remembered the parcel and decided to open it. Underneath plain brown paper, she discovered something that made her blood run cold. A KGB dossier from the late 1960s, with Gerald's name typed in bold letters across the top. Her initial reaction was disbelief. Gerald had never mentioned any direct involvement with Soviet intelligence. He had served in Turkey working on radio signals, had come home with a few stories about transmissions, jam signals, routine tasks. That was all. They married soon afterward, forging a tranquil marriage that spanned decades. But this dossier hinted at something else entirely, a large reference to code names, alleged operations, and the word traitor scrawled in ominous black ink. She flipped through the dossier at her kitchen table, heart hammering. The text was partly in Russian, partly in poor English. There were references to Agent G or Subject Carter, describing tasks that included funneling radio frequencies to Soviet handlers, potential sabotage, a chain of suspicious contacts. The final pages claimed that Gerald Carter was complicit in a major intelligence compromise. Linda felt physically ill. She shut the folder and slid it away, as though it might bite her. Could it be a forgery? A cruel hoax? But the paper felt old, official. The faint Soviet stamps, the archaic typeface. It all felt disturbingly real. She spent that night tossing and turning, haunted by the question. Had her entire marriage been a lie? The next morning, she told herself that this had to be some elaborate mistake. Gerald was gentle and honest, the kind of man who would drive elderly neighbors to the doctor or spend hours fixing a broken transistor for a friend. She decided to show the file to a close friend, Barbara, who had known them both for years. Barbara was as shocked as Linda, flipping through the dossier with trembling hands. There's no way. Gerald was the nicest man. He hated secrecy. This must be some bizarre smear. Linda nodded, clinging to the hope that the entire file was false. Yet a nagging sense told her it was not so simple. The file contained details about his time in Turkey, dates, call signs, references to equipment Linda vaguely recalled him mentioning. Her heart sank, and a creeping dread settled in. She wondered if she truly knew her husband at all. Despite Barbara's support, Linda couldn't bear the uncertainty. She spent hours in Gerald's study, sifting through old letters and personal papers, searching for anything that might confirm or refute the accusations. She found, to her surprise, that many of Gerald's personal items from that era were missing or carefully curated. The few letters from the 1960s were brief, factual, almost like official updates rather than personal notes. She discovered diaries from later years but none from the 1960s. Was he hiding something, or had he simply not kept thorough records? She tried not to leap to conclusions but felt an increasing sense of betrayal. Either this file was an elaborate ruse, or Gerald was involved in something darker than she had ever imagined. She considered going to the police, but what would she say? My deceased husband might have been a Soviet agent decades ago, or maybe not. Here's an ancient file I received from a stranger at a funeral. Sounded absurd. She also worried about tarnishing Gerald's name if it turned out to be a hoax. She decided to approach a retired lawyer she trusted, Robert, who had once handled a minor estate issue for them. Robert listened carefully, his brow furrowed. He studied the dossier. His initial reaction was that it looked suspiciously genuine, though he had no expertise in intelligence matters. He advised Linda to check with some archival sources or historians who specialized in Cold War espionage. But this might be dangerous ground, he warned. If Gerald was truly tangled with the KGB, who knows what else might come to light? Linda felt physically ill at the notion of her husband being a traitor. The word itself conjured images of men in trench coats passing microfilm in alleyways. Gerald had always been a quiet homebody, modest in ambition, satisfied with small joys. Could that have been a front? She refused to accept the idea that he had willfully betrayed his country. She prayed for a more innocent explanation. Desperate for answers, she decided to request Gerald's official military record from the Department of Defense, hoping to see if they contradicted or matched the timeline in the KGB file. Over the next weeks, she waited anxiously for a reply. Meanwhile, she rummaged daily through Gerald's personal drawers and boxes, seeking clues. During this time, she also wrestled with her grief. She felt furious at him for dying and leaving her in this swirl of uncertainty. Night after night, she found herself weeping, hugging his old cardigan. She questioned everything. Their honeymoon, their quiet evenings listening to classical records, the sweet daily notes he left on the fridge, all overshadowed by the possibility he might have been living a double life. She tried to recall every small incident that once seemed innocent but might now be suspicious. A phone call in the middle of the night he brushed off as a wrong number. The time he abruptly ended a conversation when he realized she was in earshot. She had never probed deeper, trusting him implicitly. Could love have blinded her? One day, a letter arrived from the Department of Defense. She tore it open with trembling hands. It confirmed that Gerald Carter had indeed served in Turkey from 1963 to 1967, working in radio communications. The letter stated that he left with an honorable discharge. No sign of misconduct in official records. That partially soothed her, but the KGB dossier suggested a covert operation, which wouldn't necessarily appear in official U.S. records. Linda felt no closer to the truth. She realized she needed to go further, perhaps track down old colleagues from Gerald's time in Turkey. She rummaged for addresses or names in a battered address book of his. She found only a few cryptic references to M. Dusham or Arlo B. No phone numbers. She considered searching the internet, but these were half-a-century-old references. She needed a more direct approach. A few days later, an unsettling event occurred. Late at night, her doorbell rang. She peered out the window but saw no one. On her doorstep was a small envelope, containing nothing but a slip of paper with the typed words, "Stop." Her heart hammered. Was someone warning her off digging into Gerald's past? She decided to notify Robert, the lawyer, who told her it might be wise to be cautious, but also that it could be a prank. Linda felt a surge of determination. She refused to be intimidated by cryptic warnings. She realized that if the KGB file had found its way to her, there was likely more to uncover. She suspected the man from Gerald's funeral who gave her the package might be her best lead, but she had no name or contact. She began attending local gatherings for ex-military communications staff, hoping to stumble upon a clue. During one such event at a veterans hall, Linda overheard two older men discussing old postings in Turkey. She politely introduced herself, explaining that her late husband had served there and she was seeking any who might recall him. The men recognized the name, though vaguely. One said, "Oh, Carter. He was quiet, but a good man. I remember him being uneasy about something near the end of his tour." Linda's pulse quickened. She asked if they recalled any suspicious activities. They shook their heads, saying only that the Cold War era in Turkey was rife with tension, with potential infiltration from all sides. Linda left with her mind swirling. If these men had known Gerald only as a quiet, decent fellow, it further contradicted the notion of him being a brazen traitor. One of them, with watery blue eyes named Harold, offered a tidbit. He remembered Gerald mentioning a friend named Morris, a radio operator from another unit who occasionally shared equipment. Harold recalled that Morris had vanished under mysterious circumstances. Maybe this friend was a lead. Linda took notes, though she had no last name or location. She felt frustrated at how ephemeral every clue was. Meanwhile, her nights grew restless. She felt as though she were living two lives. The grieving widow by day, sifting through funeral thank-you cards, and the clandestine researcher by night, devouring every scrap of Cold War history she could find. She discovered references to minor spy rings that had operated in Turkey, usually overshadowed by bigger stories from Berlin or Cuba. But the puzzle remained elusive. Then, at dusk one evening, her phone rang, a private number. She hesitated, then answered. A gruff voice said, "I have information about Gerald. Meet me tomorrow, 4 p.m., the library near the statue." Then it clicked off. She felt both fear and hope. This could be a trap or the key to everything. She arrived the next day at the old downtown library, heart pounding. The place was near empty, with dusty shelves and a single librarian. She waited by the statue of a local benefactor in the lobby. After several tense minutes, a lean man in a black coat approached. She recognized him instantly as the man from Gerald's funeral. He nodded at her, then ushered her to a quiet corner. He refused to give his name. He told her that the KGB file was genuine but only half the story. He urged her to go to Moscow if she wanted the truth, telling her to find a retired Russian operative who had crucial information. He scribbled a name, Kazin. "He was part of the old guard," the man said. "He knows what really happened." Then, with no further explanation, he hurried out, ignoring her pleas for clarity. Linda's mind reeled. Moscow? That was a monumental step. But she realized there was no final closure here at home. She had resources from Gerald's life insurance and a blossoming need to clear his name. Despite her fear of traveling alone to a country whose language she did not speak, she booked a flight. Before departing, she left copies of the dossier with Robert, telling him to go public if anything happened to her. She also asked her friend Barbara to look after her house. Barbara pleaded with her to be cautious. Linda tried to put on a brave face, though she was trembling inside. She had never so much as traveled outside North America, and now she was forging across the world, chasing a ghost of her husband's alleged espionage. She landed in Moscow to a swirl of foreign signage, the thick accent of Russian announcements echoing in the airport. She felt disoriented, out of place, but a guide from a small tourist service greeted her, having been booked by Robert's arrangement so Linda wouldn't be completely adrift. The next day, with nervousness in her belly, she ventured into the city. The gray buildings, the mixture of grand architecture and modern sprawl, gave her a sense of time layered upon time. She asked the guide about finding a man named Kazin. The guide had no direct leads but suggested checking an archive building known for storing Soviet-era records. Linda spent hours fumbling with the language barrier, searching for references to ex-KGB operatives, finding mostly dead ends. At last, a librarian recognized the name. Colonel Kazin had once overseen minor infiltration networks in Turkey. The librarian believed he was still alive, living in a small apartment near the outskirts. With the address scribbled on a slip, Linda took a rattling taxi, forging through congested Moscow streets to a drab apartment block. Fear knotted her stomach as she knocked on a scratched metal door. A hunched older man with a cane answered. She introduced herself in halting phrases, showing him the KGB file. He scowled, about to shut the door, but froze upon seeing Gerald's name. Slowly, he beckoned her inside. His home was dim, cluttered with old books and a faint smell of mothballs. He refused tea or small talk, demanding to know why she had come. Linda explained about Gerald, how she found the file, how it accused him of treason, but she suspected otherwise. She insisted that if he had the truth, she needed it. Kazan studied her face for a long moment. Then he turned away, rummaging in a battered trunk. He pulled out a dusty folder and tossed it on the table. Your husband, Carter, or as we called him, the radio man. The official file said he was with us. But it was a lie. He sat down heavily, cane resting across his lap. Linda sat across from him, heart racing, absorbing each word. He explained that in the labyrinth of Cold War espionage, scapegoats were sometimes created to hide the real traitor. Carter's name had been used in some documents to mislead investigating agencies. The actual spy was someone else, a man close to Gerald, an American official who had orchestrated the infiltration for personal gain. Gerald discovered fragments of that treachery, but by the time he realized the danger, it was too late. The KGB latched onto Gerald's name, forging a narrative that pinned blame on him. Linda felt a torrent of relief and heartbreak at once. So Gerald wasn't a traitor, but he had been framed. She asked why he never cleared his name. Kazan shrugged wearily. He tried, I think. The real traitor threatened him, threatened your husband's family, or that's the rumor. Carter took the fall to keep someone safe. Maybe you. Tears pricked Linda's eyes. Gerald had always been protective. The idea that he quietly bore a false label of traitor for decades, to shield someone else, tore her heart apart. She pressed for more specifics. Kazan shook his head. He only knew that the real spy was code-named Monarch, someone high up who had once been Gerald's friend. Linda demanded the name. Kazan said it was never recorded in his documents, but that an old sealed file in a certain state archive might contain references. He scribbled directions to another building on the outskirts of Moscow, warning her that bribes or cunning might be needed to access it. Linda felt a jolt of both fear and determination. She had come this far. She left Kazan's apartment with a swirl of emotions. He had answered the biggest question, removing the specter of betrayal from Gerald's memory. But new questions loomed. Who was Monarch? Why had Gerald been forced to remain silent all these years? She dreaded the possibility that the traitor might still be alive, might try to bury the truth again. She decided to push on. Over the next days, she navigated the shadowy corridors of the old state archive. She found a sympathetic archivist after slipping him some discreet rubles. He guided her to a restricted record room, cautioning that she risked stepping on official toes. She explained that her husband had been wrongly accused. The archivist, perhaps moved by her grief, let her see a battered box of microfilm. She spent hours at a flickering viewer, scanning faint typed pages in Cyrillic, searching for references to Monarch, Gerald Carter, or any sign of 1960s infiltration in Turkey. She was exhausted, eyes sore, about to give up. Then she saw it. A partial transcript of an interrogation mentioning Monarch, stating that Monarch was a high-ranking American official in the communications sector who had orchestrated false leads implicating Gerald Carter. Linda gasped, heart pounding. The name Morris Flynn appeared. Flynn. Linda recalled that name from an old letter Gerald had once shown her, referencing a buddy from Turkey. The text described how Flynn had direct contact with Soviet operatives, how he manipulated intelligence to appear as though Carter was the mole. The file ended abruptly with an order to keep it top secret. Linda's head spun. So the real traitor was Gerald's friend, Morris Flynn, a name she had never heard much about. She cursed how easily Flynn had escaped justice while Gerald lived under a cloud. She realized that if Flynn was still alive, he had lived free while Gerald carried the burden. She slammed the microfilm viewer off in fury, tears welling again. She had to get this truth out to exonerate Gerald publicly. She copied what she could with the archivist's help, storing the evidence in a secure folder. She was about to leave when the archivist tugged her sleeve, whispering that the existence of such a file might enrage certain old powers. Linda nodded, determined not to be silenced. Returning to her modest hotel, Linda found another note slipped under her door. "Stop searching. It won't bring him back." She felt a tremor of fear but refused to yield. She had all she needed now to clear her husband's name. She hurriedly checked out of the hotel the next morning, shipping half her evidence by courier to Robert in the States. She carried the rest with her on the flight back, anxious each time someone looked at her carry-on as though it might contain top-secret revelations. The flight home was a blur of sleepless hours. She looked out the window at the clouds, imagining Gerald's gentle face, hearing his voice calling her name. She whispered, "I know the truth now, my love," tears slipping free. Once back on American soil, she collapsed in relief. She showed Robert the new documents implicating Morris Flynn. Together, they pored over references, cross-checking them with anything publicly known about Flynn. Robert discovered that Flynn had become a well-connected figure in private industry after leaving the military. No mention of espionage. He was rumored to have significant wealth, possibly from shadowy deals. If Linda was to publicly accuse him, it would be a war. Still, she felt unwavering. Gerald had sacrificed everything to protect someone, maybe Flynn's family. She intended to set that record straight. Robert suggested a careful approach. They might contact certain journalists or ex-military historians, unveiling the documentary evidence. Linda, though reluctant to thrust herself into a media storm, recognized it might be the only way to draw attention and pressure the government to re-examine Gerald's file. She approached a respected investigative journalist named Pamela, who had previously exposed a hidden Cold War program. Pamela listened intently, eyes widening as Linda recounted the ordeal, then studied the dossier, the microfilm copies, the references to Monarch and Flynn. Pamela said, "If what you're saying is accurate, this is a bombshell. But we need to verify everything meticulously." Linda agreed wholeheartedly. Over the next few weeks, Pamela's research team scoured archives, cross-examined intelligence experts. Meanwhile, Linda laid low, half expecting an intimidation attempt. A few times, she noticed suspicious cars near her home, though it might have been paranoia. The tension escalated when Pamela discovered multiple attempts to bury any mention of Flynn's foreign contacts. Some retired officials hinted off the record that Flynn was untouchable. Others insisted Gerald Carter's name had surfaced in old investigations but was never confirmed as a traitor. The conflicting accounts only heightened Linda's resolve. She pressed forward. She told Barbara about her journey, the revelations in Moscow. Barbara was stunned, grateful that Gerald's innocence was all but certain. Still, Barbara worried. Going after Flynn might be dangerous. "Are you sure you want to do this?" Linda nodded, tears in her eyes. "I owe it to Gerald. He lived under suspicion all these years. I want the world to know he was a hero, not a traitor." Eventually, Pamela finished her investigation. She wrote a carefully sourced article, referencing Linda's evidence, the sealed files, and the statements from Kazan. The piece alleged that Morris Flynn had been the real Soviet informant, that he orchestrated an elaborate ruse to pin blame on Gerald, and that Gerald discovered enough to confront Flynn but was threatened into silence. The day the article was set to publish, Linda felt ill with nerves. She worried about legal threats or retribution. Pamela, stoic, said the paper's lawyers believed the evidence was strong enough to withstand libel suits. True to form, the morning after publication, news outlets exploded with shock. Some dismissed it as conspiracy. Others recognized that the official Soviet stamps and cross-reference details were compelling. The phone rang off the hook at Linda's house. She refused interviews from tabloids, agreeing only to speak with a reputable news station, where she calmly recounted how she discovered the dossier. Within days, the scandal soared. Flynn's office released a curt denial, labeling the allegations baseless. But the swirl of newly uncovered documents battered his credibility. Government agencies were forced to comment, rummaging old Cold War archives, acknowledging that partial evidence suggested Carter had been wrongly suspect. Linda's heart soared at that statement alone. Finally, an official indication that Gerald was not the villain. Flynn, cornered, tried to shift blame, but more puzzle pieces emerged. Secret bank accounts from decades ago, offshore funds connected to suspicious channels. The story turned unstoppable. Within weeks, Flynn's reputation was in shambles. He faced calls for a federal investigation into potential espionage, though the statute of limitations on certain crimes might have expired. Regardless, public opinion turned savage. Linda felt no glee in his downfall, only relief that Gerald's name was cleared. The final blow came when an old colleague of Flynn's stepped forward, offering testimony that he'd overheard a conversation in which Flynn boasted about framing Gerald. The coworker, now in frail health, decided it was time to unburden his conscience. This sealed Flynn's fate in the court of public opinion. Meanwhile, Linda quietly worked with Pamela and Robert to petition the military to formally exonerate Gerald, removing any hidden black marks from his file. The Department of Defense, after a new internal review, found that Gerald Carter was never indicted for treason, meaning he had no official record to expunge. But they issued a statement praising him for his honorable service. Linda wept upon reading it. She framed that statement, placing it next to Gerald's old photograph on the mantel. News outlets eventually moved on to fresh scandals. Linda felt a calm in her chest, an inner hush that she had not known since the day of the funeral. She had proven Gerald's innocence. She wished desperately he could be there to see it, to know he could stand proud. She walked the house sometimes, thinking of how he used to fix the radio, how his face would glow hearing signals from across the world. She realized that, in a sense, he had always listened to distant echoes of conflict, carrying secrets even she never suspected. She forgave him for the silence. She realized he had done it out of love, maybe to protect her from the ugliness of a major espionage scandal. Months later, she decided to return to her normal routine, volunteering at the local library, meeting Barbara for coffee once a week. A local historian approached her about a small ceremony to honor Gerald's name. Linda modestly accepted. They gathered in a small park, with about 50 people, unveiling a plaque that read, "In memory of Gerald Carter, loyal American, skilled radio technician, and beloved husband, who endured suspicion to shield others but never faltered in his quiet bravery." Linda's voice shook as she thanked them. Tears sparkled in her eyes, but they were tears of gratitude, not sorrow. She had begun healing, buoyed by the knowledge that the man she loved was no traitor. The vow they exchanged decades ago, to trust and cherish, had not been broken. He had cherished her enough to keep her safe from the consequences of that old betrayal, never once letting her suspect the burden he carried. Sometime later, Linda felt an odd urge to revisit the city of Moscow. She wanted to see it again, not from a place of frantic searching, but to place a small token of thanks near Kazan's rundown apartment, an acknowledgement that his information had been the pivot that cleared Gerald's name. She flew quietly, no fanfare, carrying a single white rose. She found the building, but Kazan's apartment was vacant, a for sale sign in the window. She asked neighbors, who said the old man had passed away quietly a month prior. Linda felt a pang of sorrow. She left the white rose on the doorstep, whispering a soft thanks to the memory of the man who aided her quest. She walked through Red Square under a bright sun, reflecting on how many secrets the city held, how many stories of heartbreak and heroism intertwined in those old cobblestone streets. Returning home, Linda found a new sense of calm. She rummaged the last time through Gerald's old trunk, not to search for clues but to fold up his belongings with love. She lingered on a battered photograph of him in Turkey, leaning against a radio console, half smiling. She pressed the photo to her heart, closed her eyes. She whispered, "You were exactly who I thought you were." With that, she placed it gently in a small wooden box, adding the Department of Defense statement, the news clipping from Pamela's article, and a short letter she wrote summarizing everything she discovered. If future generations in her family ever wondered about Gerald, they could open that box and learn the real story, not the rumors or illusions. In the weeks that followed, Linda resumed living fully. She cooked again, hosting Barbara for dinner. She planted a small rose bush in the backyard, symbolizing the fresh start she had found. In her occasional quiet moments, she sat on the porch with a cup of tea, gazing at the sky, imagining Gerald's voice in the distant static of radio waves. She felt a gentle sorrow that he had carried such a heavy secret, but also a profound gratitude that she had uncovered it and freed him from false condemnation. Sometimes at night, she dreamt of him smiling in uniform, free of burdens. Friends noticed Linda's changed aura. She was still grieving, but with a glow of resolution, as though unshackled from an invisible chain. She told them only the barest essentials, that Gerald had been exonerated from an old suspicion, that she traveled to set records straight. They admired her determination, hearing the story in bits but rarely pressing for the darkest details. She realized that not everyone needed to know the full saga. That final sense of closure, that the man she had loved so deeply was never the traitor that Dusty File implied, was all she needed to hold on to. She carried that truth forward, forging a new chapter of her life with quiet dignity. Some months later, she received a letter from the man in the black coat, the one who initially gave her the KGB dossier. It contained only a single line. "He would be proud of you." No name, no return address. Linda folded it, smiling faintly, then placed it in the wooden box with the other memories. She concluded that perhaps this man had once been an ally of Gerald's, or even a silent guardian ensuring she found the path to the truth. She felt no need to chase him further. She had what she needed. Finally, on a warm spring morning, Linda decided to hold a small memorial at home, inviting a few close friends. She displayed pictures of Gerald from across his life, childhood, their wedding, the day he got home from Turkey, them at an anniversary picnic, and even one taken a year before his passing. She told stories about how he used to fix broken radios for neighbors, how he never turned away a cat that wandered onto their porch, how he always insisted on a bit of honey in his tea. She ended the memorial with a simple statement. Gerald was a man of great love and quiet courage. Though the world once misunderstood him, we now know he did everything in his power to protect those he cared for. I couldn't be prouder of him. Applause rose from the small group, tears glistening on many faces. Linda felt her own tears, but they were tinted with the warmth of pride rather than heartbreak. After the guests left, she walked into the living room, gazing upon the single shelf where she had placed Gerald's photo, the framed statement from the Department of Defense, and a small plaque a local historian had given her in his memory. She ran a hand over them, then whispered softly, "We did it, Gerald. You're free." She swore she felt a gentle presence behind her. Maybe it was just the breeze from an open window, or maybe it was him. She closed her eyes, picturing his gentle smile. The sting of tears came again, but no longer weighed down by doubt. She was certain now of who he had been all along. In the days that followed, Linda allowed herself to start traveling for leisure, seeing the world Gerald had once told her about in bits and pieces. She visited a tiny coastal town in Maine, fulfilling an old plan they never got around to. She took a short cruise with Barbara, embracing laughter and new experiences. Each time she glimpsed a radio tower or an old transistor radio in an antique shop, she felt a pang of nostalgia, pausing to remember him. She pictured how he might react with delight to see a rare radio model from the 50s or 60s. She said a silent thanks that his name was cleared, that he lay in rest with no black mark haunting him. Eventually, a small museum near the site of the old communications base in Turkey learned of the story. They wrote to Linda, requesting permission to display some of Gerald's gear or letters in an exhibit about the unsung role of radio technicians in the Cold War. Linda considered it carefully. She decided yes, it would be a fitting tribute. She shipped them a few items, including a battered pair of headphones Gerald had once used, and an official photograph with a note about his posthumous exoneration. She felt a wave of relief, imagining visitors reading about a man who quietly served, who faced false accusations, and whose devotion was proven in the end. Over time, Linda found a gentle companionship in reflection, not drowning in grief but living with Gerald's memory as a steadfast presence. She resumed small joys, gardening, reading by the fireplace. On a crisp autumn evening, She donated to a scholarship fund in Gerald's name, directed at students pursuing studies in communications or radiotech. She typed a short dedication, "In memory of Gerald Carter, who believed in the power of signals and the quiet heroes behind them." She hoped that might help a young mind discover the same wonder Gerald once had, minus the heartbreak of espionage entanglements. As the first anniversary of his death approached, Linda visited his grave. The wind ruffled her hair. She placed a single rose by the headstone, feeling the smooth lettering that read, "Gerald Carter, beloved husband, faithful servant." She spoke aloud, recapping the year's events, as though he could hear. How she had braved the journey to Moscow, confronted dark secrets, and proven his innocence. She ended with, "I love you. I always will." Then she rose, breath quivering, and turned away. The sun broke through a swath of cloud, bathing the cemetery in gentle light. She walked back to her car, posture tall, stepping into the next chapter of her life with confidence. In her final approach to closure, Linda wrote a personal essay about her experiences, never intending to publish it widely, but wanting to capture the emotional journey. She described the avalanche of confusion when she received the KGB dossier at the funeral, the terror of traveling alone, the heartbreak and relief in discovering the real traitor. She wrote with raw honesty about how the illusions nearly shattered her marriage's memory, but in the end, only strengthened her admiration for Gerald. She concluded with the lines, "We are all complicated stories, but some of us bear burdens we cannot share. My husband's burden was protecting those he loved from the blow of betrayal. In exposing the truth, I set him free, and in doing so, I found my own freedom." With that last line typed, she set the essay aside, uncertain if she might share it with family or keep it locked away as a personal testament. And so Linda lived on with renewed purpose, carrying Gerald's memory as a banner of quiet heroism. She told close friends that if she learned anything, it was the necessity of chasing truth, no matter how painful or difficult, because living with illusions was far worse. The KGB dossier, now a historical footnote, rested in a safe deposit box, a testament to how easily a life's narrative can be twisted by fear and secrecy. She visited that box only rarely, mostly content to let the dust gather on the old pages. Once in a while, she'd open it to run her fingers over the official stamps, recalling the mania of her detective work. Then she'd lock it away again, reminding herself that the truth had emerged, her mission complete. As the second autumn fell, Linda found a small sense of romance returning to her days. She allowed the possibility of new friendships, even joined a group trip to Italy with Barbara, tasting new wines and strolling ancient ruins. She never forgot Gerald, but she felt him quietly encouraging her to live freely. The last vestiges of anxiety about his name, about her ignorance of his past, dissolved like morning fog. She realized her love for him had been well placed. He was exactly the man she had believed in, a man who carried the weight of false accusations so others might not suffer. She felt proud of him, proud of herself for unearthing that hidden story. In the end, she saw him as more heroic than ever, standing unwavering in the swirl of Cold War shadows. On an afternoon near the holiday season, Linda gathered a few family members for a small reading of the exoneration documents and the newspaper article that had cleared Gerald's name. They listened, some wiping tears. Her nephew expressed awe that his uncle had been so entangled in espionage. Her sister offered quiet comfort, saying she always knew Gerald was a good man. Linda felt a sense of unity, that the family bond was reaffirming his memory. The day ended in a calm hush of love and acceptance. Though Linda's sorrow never vanished completely, it settled into a gentle chord in her heart. She visited places Gerald once dreamed of seeing. A small island off the coast, a mountainous region known for radio telescopes, carrying his memory like a compass. Each time, she paused to reflect on how intangible the line could be between illusions and truth, between betrayal and devotion. She also considered how many others might remain mislabeled in old intelligence files. She gleaned empathy for those lost in the cracks of secrecy. But for her and Gerald, the final record was set straight. Looking back, She realized how drastically her life had shifted from the moment that stranger pressed the file into her hands. His cryptic statement, "He was a good man," had rung both ominous and comforting. She wished she could find him again, to say thanks for nudging her onto the path of revelation. But she never encountered him again. She supposed that was part of the tapestry of espionage, where some folks appear only as catalysts, then fade away. The sense of closure she achieved was enough. She hoped, in some intangible way, Gerald knew the weight was lifted, that their marriage, founded on trust, remained vindicated. Finally, on a mild day in late spring, Linda concluded that her vow was fulfilled. She no longer needed to chase leads or rummage archives. She had reclaimed Gerald's legacy, shared the truth with those who mattered, and found peace for herself. She set a single chair on the back porch in the evening light, brewed a cup of tea, and settled in to watch the sunset. She closed her eyes, imagining Gerald at her side with that old transistor radio crackling softly. She felt his presence, a quiet warmth. He would always be with her, untainted by suspicion, resting in the knowledge that love had the final word. Thanks for watching till the end. If you enjoyed the story, give this video a like if you haven't already and subscribe for more.